Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are taking a look at 10 hidden gems for every letter of the alphabet, specifically for the PlayStation 2. We are now on the letter F, and surprisingly this was a very difficult letter to do, as there were quite a few games that I could have included, and probably should have included, but I think I have gotten 10 games that don't get talked about. Some of them I have never heard of until looking for games. But anyway, you already know the drill, so it's time for me to shut up, and let's take a look at some games. We are going to start with some chopper action with Fireblade. Instead of me telling you the story, how about this helpful gentleman does it for me?
Fireblade is an anti-terrorist military force formed by Western nations to stomp out terrorist cells around the world. The largest and most dangerous of these cells is the United Eastern States, or UES. Intelligence sources have uncovered information that the UES have been establishing training camps and production facilities for weapons of mass destruction in strategic areas around the world. It appears they are preparing for an all-out war against the West. The time has come. The threat can no longer be allowed to exist. Fireblade has been mobilized.
Thank you, gruff-voiced army man. Your part of Fireblade is as a pilot, flying one of their awesome high-tech choppers. As you'd expect, the game is divided into a number of missions, which range from blowing stuff up to killing stuff. But actually, to be fair, there are a few variations of everything here, with some escort missions, some missions where you're carrying passengers and have to drop them off in tactical war zones, and other missions where you just have to survive until reinforcements get there. And I was actually surprised at how much variety there were in the missions. Actually, playing the game is half decent as well. Your chopper is easy to get to grips with thanks to the dual analog controls. You use the shoulder buttons to attack, with each button firing a different weapon. You get machine gun, which has unlimited ammo, but is almost useless against anything with the slightest amount of armor. Then you've got missiles, which are powerful but hard to aim as they just fire ahead of you. Then there's homing missiles, which you can lock onto enemies with. These are really good to use and have medium power, but of course they're limited in number. You even have a sniper gun, which is cool. Your chopper can go into a stealth mode where it's cloaked. In this mode you can zoom in with your sniper to take out enemies from a distance. Stealth mode also gives you access to an EMP, so you can disable enemy electronics, which is a nice touch. Stealth does seem a bit daft in a chopper though, and that is kinda right, but here it does make you harder to spot, but not impossible, and if you get too close to enemies they will still hear your blades. Thankfully you do have an indicator that tells you how visible you are to enemies. If the yellow bar gets all the way to the top, then you'll be spotted. Each mission gives you a number of objectives, and I do have to say that the difficulty varies wildly from mission to mission. Usually it was the stealth missions that gave me the trouble, with it being hard to keep from being spotted. Even though you are in a chopper, you can't go as high as you want, and there's usually mountains that you can't get over. Not realistic, but I see why they did it. You've got a pretty decent radar that always points to your objectives, and you can read your briefings in the pause menu. I do recommend doing this, as sometimes it's not entirely clear what you're meant to be doing, and there were actually times where I'd failed the mission and not really know why, and equally there was times where I completed some of the missions and I still didn't really know why. But that might be me being impatient though. Because the thing was, I did have a fair bit of fun with this game, and I wanted to get into the action. There were some really cool battles here, with the enemies having a range of ground units, tanks and choppers of their own, and you'll go to various locations across the world, and the landscapes do get mixed up enough. It doesn't look particularly groundbreaking, in fact it looks a bit ropey actually, but it does mean that everything runs smoothly and more importantly the controls are responsive. Overall this is a fun little title that's more arcade than sim, so if you like blowing stuff up, this is worth a go. And if you do like blowing things up, then Fantavision will be right up your street. Fantavision is essentially a fireworks-based puzzle game that's easy to pick up and play, but quite hard to put down. The gameplay is simple, and I have a feeling that this is going to be a pretty short segment. But that's alright, I should really make these segments shorter as it is. Anyway, in Fantavision you play as an exciting cursor over a variety of nice-looking backdrops. Suddenly, a bunch of fireworks will rise up from the bottom of the screen, and you've got to aim your cursor and tag the fireworks. But you can't just do this willy-nilly, you have to match 3 or more of the same colour before they'll explode. What does help is that once you tag a colour, you can then only tag fireworks of that same colour, so you don't accidentally screw up. However, you do have to be on the lookout for flashing rainbow-like colour ones. These actually let you change your colour mid-throw through your combo, but you'd also keep your current combo. So for example, you could tag 2 blue ones, then a rainbow one, then a few red ones, then another rainbow one, then some greens, and so on. And when you're ready, you press the circle button to detonate anything that you've tagged, resulting in some pretty cool looking fireworks displays. Of course, the bigger your chain, the more points you get, and you even get power-ups that improve your score and take you to bonus stages if you create some big chains. And that's what it's all about. You want to make as many chains as possible, but you also can't take your time, as fireworks will fizzle out if you take too long to detonate them, so you've got to work fast but methodically. You are always told what the next colours are going to be, so you want to plan a bit ahead. If a colour of your current chain is going to appear, then you don't want to detonate until it has appeared. But if they're all new colours, you might as well get rid of them. It did take a few goes for me to click with this, but once I did, it really did become one of those games where you're hard to put it down, and you've got to have just one more try. The graphics here are nice, it's just some backgrounds of cities and landscapes that move around a bit, but the particle effects and the fireworks look really good, and I do love how it looks when you set off a big chain reaction. It's also quite a relaxing game. The music is chilled out, and the announcer is quite therapeutic. This is actually a really cool game, and definitely one that I would recommend giving it a go. Do give it a few tries, and you'll probably find that you'll want to keep going. It's not easy, and it took me a while to get anywhere into it, but it's one that I've been back to a few times since recording this footage, just to keep trying. Fighting game time now with Fighting Angels from our friends at D3. This all-female fighter is a classic PS2 budget title. The game doesn't offer anything in the way of story, it knows what we want. Instead, you're immediately given the option to play a tournament, versus mode, survival or practice. Choose what you want, and then you pick from a bunch of sexy bikini wearing ladies who all want to have a fight. If you choose tournament mode, you'll fight through all of the other characters until you get to the final boss. The fights themselves all take place in a 3D ring, and is pretty large, and you can move around anywhere you like. Unlike most fighters, you don't control this game on a 2D plane. It's more like a 3D action game in whatever direction you press on the analog stick is the direction that you'll move. Each of the 4 face buttons is an attack, and you've got a few punches and kicks, and of course there are special moves as well, which are mainly done by pressing a direction and an attack button. The moves are actually very easy to pull off. None of them are crazy fireballs or anything like that, instead it's all punches and kicks with a few throws in there for good measure, though I could never figure out how to actually do them, and I was too lazy to look it up. Something you notice early on, other than the fantastically wobbly jiggle physics, is that the characters all share a hell of a lot of moves. At first I actually thought they were all played exactly the same, but that isn't quite the case, they are quite different. However, the range of attacks available isn't great, but it is enough. You can put together combos easily enough, and you'll also soon learn that it's possible just to spam the same couple of moves repeatedly and you'll do pretty well. This isn't exactly a deep game. But it is still fun, and yeah, that might be because of the jiggles. You don't get a variety of locations, just one beach that you're fighting on until you get to the final boss, and then you fight in a concrete ring. How exciting. What's interesting though is that every few levels you get a weapon stage, where a selection of weapons appear randomly, from baseball bats to swords and even bloody machine guns. These fights are actually really fun, racing your opponent to get the weapons for massive damage, and it actually says it's a fight to the death, so yes, you actually kill the other person. When you beat the tournament mode, you unlock new costumes for characters, which is an incentive to go back, but really you probably just want to see the skin, and the default one is the tiny bikini. You would have thought they would have made you work for that. Oh well. But actually, the controls here are decent, and the gameplay, while basic, is not exactly bad. And it's one of those games that would be good fun with a few friends and a few drinks of an evening. Give it a go if you like bouncy things. Firefighter F.D. 18 is a really cool game where you play as a firefighter who has to battle his way through a number of huge fires in a number of locations, rescuing civilians and doing your best to stop people from dying and buildings collapsing. There's no cats up trees though, unfortunately. As the game progresses, you find out that there's fires being caused by a crazy arsonist, and with the help of a news reporter, you've got to track him down and stop him while putting out the fires. Now, if you've watched my video dedicated to firefighting video games, then you'll know that I really have a soft spot for these kind of games, and this one is a great example. It's played more like arcade than simulation, so you never have to worry about your hose not reaching or the running out of water. You get unlimited both of these. You spend your time exploring buildings and other locations that are filled with fire and smoke, and a lot of the time you won't be able to completely distinguish the fire, and instead you just have to get rid of enough to be able to rescue all the survivors. There are obstacles all over the place, and you'll need to use your axe to smash boxes and doors that are blocking your way. You'll also need to find keys and other items and crawl through vents that let you get to previously inaccessible places. Fighting the fires is easy enough, you just fire your water and aim with the analog stick. Fires do go down quite fast, but they also spread really quickly, and you've got to watch out for environmental hazards like oil or gas spills, as they'll create massive explosions which might kill you or the other survivors. Obviously, as they are on fire, the environment will also change a lot as you play, with things collapsing or exploding all over the place. This means that your previously planned escape route might be messed up, and this always keeps you on your toes, and you really do have to be careful, as you can die in just seconds if you're stuck in a fire. There's even boss fires here, which are particularly large ones. These are sometimes stationary and the ones that fire fireballs out, and they need to be doused quickly. Or sometimes they're ones that actually move around and set fire to anything that they touch. You'll know when there's a boss fight around, as they have their own life bar, which I actually really like, and works quite well having a boss here. You'll get cutscenes and stuff to explain the story, and the game I think does take itself a little bit too seriously, even though the story is really dumb, and the exposition here is some of the best and most blatant I've ever seen, but it kind of adds a B-movie charm to it. Graphics wise, I think it really looks good. The fires all look awesome, and there's a good variety of flames as well. Rooms filled with smoke obscuring your view, and you'll need to crouch to be able to see clearer. This is a nice touch, and the movement and animation is very good here as well. The controls are decent and responsive, and it's rarely the game's fault when you die. You even have a special shot which you can use a handful of times per level, where your mate suddenly appears out of nowhere and fires a massive blast of water. This is really good against bosses, or when you're in a tight spot. Overall, I really enjoyed this game, and I'll definitely be going back to finish it soon. Someone who probably never has any problems with fire is Finny the fish, the least imaginatively named fish in all of Fishtory. This is a 3D adventure game where you are Finny, a fish who's exploring his little pond area and is suddenly dragged into a crazy adventure where you've got to find and rescue 7 other aquatic animals from 7 locations to save your waters, kind of like Link does in most of the Zelda games. And I'll tell you what though, don't write this one off, it's loads of fun. You have a hub world where you're taught the basics of swimming and being a fish, and controlling everything is actually surprisingly easy. Being an adventure game, you meet loads of crazy characters and they give you various tasks to do, which essentially are all fetch quests really. You'll need to find all sorts of items to complete objectives and open up new areas or get other items from the characters. Something here though is that you can only carry one item at a time. Thankfully this is usually done well enough that you won't be doing lots of backtracking, but if you do get a different item to the one you are holding, the one that you did have doesn't stay where you left it, it just goes back to its starting place. There is also a huge amount of other wildlife in the waters. You've got tiny things from dragonflies and bugs, all the way up to things like crabs and other massive fish, and of course some of the other fish are absolutely massive, and you'll want to keep your distance from them or they'll mess you up. What's really fun though is that you can eat almost every other creature in the game. You have to constantly eat stuff so you don't starve to death, and it also replenishes your health. And as well as this, it makes you grow, so eventually anything that used to be a threat will soon just be a snack. There's something really satisfying about this. And also, anything you eat gets logged in a book, and you'll want to eat as much as you can so you can fill that book up with all the different information about the fish. You can actually eat some enemies that are bigger than you as well. You've got a tail whip attack, which you can use to stun most enemies or destroy objects, and if you're lucky, you can tail whip big enemies until they're stunned, and then somehow stuff them down your gullet. Not all the time though, so don't get cocky. Also, being a fish, you have to be on the lookout for fishermen. Some of the fish or bugs you eat are actually fishermen's lures in disguise. Eat one of these and you'll have to battle against being caught in what is essentially a little minigame where you've got to break the line. If you're successful, you get to keep the lure, which is kind of pointless and more of an advert for real-life fishing apparatus. Kind of random. The environments you explore all look really good, but can be a bit confusing to get your way around them. I got lost a fair bit, and I did have issues with actually knowing what the hell I was meant to be doing. There isn't a huge amount of direction here, which was annoying a few times, and I did spend a fair bit of time swimming around aimlessly, not really knowing what the hell I was meant to be doing. You can talk to characters as often as you like though, and they'll remind you of what you're meant to be doing, but it's not really written down anywhere. But exploring the environment is actually quite fun, and you'll find extra scales which will boost your stats. These are often quite well hidden, but you do get clues as to where you might find them from other characters. You can also jump out of water and go upstream in places, and you'll need to do this to reach some of the more out of the way places that tend to hold more secrets or items that you need. The game looks really good with some great character designs and locations, and the animation is excellent. It's also kind of a relaxing game, and you can really take your time to explore every nook and cranny. I actually thought this was going to be a kids game when I first started playing it, but it turns out that it's really not. Don't let the strange box art fool you. This is a fun 3D adventure game that you might get a bit hooked on.
1, 2, 3, 4, play my PS2 some more. Run, jump, laser time, that is what Futurama's for. Hello, I'm Beltbuckle Bill, and here are my thoughts on a video game. Futurama is a 3D platformer released on the PlayStation 2 in 2003, based on the animated TV series of the same name and brought to you by Unique Development Studios, Vivendi Universal Games, and CSI Games, or Sky Games, not sure. The plot. Good news, everyone! Terrible impression, apologies. Professor Farnsworth has sold Planet Express to Mom, who now owns more than 50% of the Earth, so becomes the supreme overlord and enslaves everyone. The gang, obviously, don't want to be enslaved, so make a plan to escape. Only their ship is super broken and they need to fix it. By platforming and shooting. Let's be real, I'm only a couple of hours into the game, so the plot hasn't developed much more than trekking to pick up a replacement engine, so I can't really tell you what happens next. I mean, I could if I could be bothered to look at the internet, but if you've already played this, then you'll know the plot, and if you haven't, and you like what you see, then you'll play it and reveal the plot for yourself. That's right, this is my gift to you. In the first 4 stages, you take control of Fry. Stage 1 is set in Planet Express, where you have to explore the premises and find Professor Farnsworth's tools. Stage 2 has you trawling the sewers beneath the city. Stage 3, the subway. And finally, Stage 4, the streets. Again, there are lots more levels, and the internet tells tales of playing as other characters, so well worth persevering if you like this type of thing. Fry can run, jump, interact, and bash things with his hammer. Later on, he is given a gun and collects a shotgun for all kinds of shooting glory. Laser gun and laser shotgun, should I add. When locked onto targets, Fry can strafe, which is handy, and he collects money, which gives him extra lives, and Slurm that replenishes his energy. The dying mechanic is explained very early on, whereby Fry dies, and Professor Farnsworth births a clone. There are checkpoints throughout the latter levels, so you don't have to start from the beginning of each level again if you die. There are a handful of baddies to bash and shoot, including running mutants, super hard running mutants, they take more shots to kill, tentacle monsters, snake mutants, and various grunts with laser guns, rocket launchers, and barbed wire baseball bats. They are all pretty easy to kill, so long as you maintain your distance and strafe like a pro. The visuals aren't great, a victim of their time, but if you are a fan of Futurama, like me, then you get a kick out of familiar faces and voices. All the voice actors are from the series, so you'll be chuckling along, as I did, especially when Fry mimics shooting noises. Pew 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 pew. The level designs are interesting, with lots to look at and interact with along the way. The sounds are cool, not just the voices, but explosions, lasers and death screams galore. The music is very tedious, the loops are not pleasant, and if playing for a bit longer, I would have switched them off. Would I play it again? No. It is at this stage that I have to confess I'm not a huge platforming fan, namely due to constant peril of falling to my death, which I did lots in the second stage. Would I tell my younger self to play it? Probably. I would have had a lot more time and patience back then. Would I recommend it to a friend? Only if they love platformers and or Futurama. My final thoughts. After having to consult a walkthrough on the first stage, possibly more a reflection on me than the game, I nearly gave up after just 30 minutes, but I pushed through and I actually enjoyed stages 3 and 4. The first stage you find is not very linear, at least I didn't find it linear. It's a big exploration and not much fun searching aimlessly in my opinion. The second stage had lots of moments of falling to one's death, which is never fun for me. The third and fourth were less platforming and more shooting, which suits me and was a lot more linear. My biggest frustration, though, was the damn camera. You can move it with the right stick, but only if there is room to move it, if that makes sense. So if you're in a corridor, you are stuck at the angle and the camera cannot spin around you. Thank you for watching and or listening. If you like this content, then like. If you want to see more, then subscribe. Game over, man! Game over!
More cartoon time now with Full Metal Alchemist and the Broken Angel, based on the anime that I've never seen and will never watch, though I've heard it's actually quite good. You play as Eric, the main guy with silly hair, and your robot mate Al. Now, I'm assuming there's a backstory somewhere to who Al is, as he talks like a 5-year-old girl, but I'm assuming it's his mate or relative that's trapped in a robot body, but that's not really relevant here, and I don't really care. So there is a lot of plot here, which I'm sure ties in with a bunch of the characters from the show. In fact, for me, there was a bit too much plot, and it seemed like there was a ton of talking every 5 minutes. Thankfully, you can skip most of it, or speed it up at least. I'm not really into the overly dramatic stories and love lives of these anime characters, unless it's Mr. Popo. Thankfully, the gameplay is good fun, and it's a 3D action game where you go through a bunch of levels packed with enemies that you need to kill to death. And the killing here is the fun part. You've got a normal attack combo that you do by hammering the attack button, which is kinda weak, but you will level up as you play, getting stronger and getting more energy. But the main mechanic here is your alchemy, and I really liked how this worked. By holding the circle button, any items in the world that can be used alchemy-wise are highlighted. Then, when you're close enough to them, a bar will build, and depending on how long you hold the button down for before releasing it, it determines what happens to that object in the world. Most objects turn into weapons, so in a simple box on the floor can be transformed into a knife or a sword or something. Other things can be turned into bombs, guns, lances, and more. Your mate Al is also with you all the time, and he'll attack enemies as well. Sometimes objects can be turned into weapons for him to use, but they only last a little while, whereas your weapons are permanent, but you can switch to new ones whenever you've made them. Sometimes items can be turned into hazards like landmines or spike traps, and some even turn into massive powerful gun turrets. It's really fun to experiment with everything in the world to see what you can make, and create the right combination for the situation. If there's loads of enemies, it's good to make landmines and wait for them to come to you to blow them up. Or maybe you just want the massive sword to chop people's heads off. Up to you. What's cool is that once you've transformed something for the first time, you're then always reminded what it can be turned into when you see it again, which is a nice touch. The levels are rarely more than exploring a quite large location until you're forced to kill all the enemies that you see to progress on to the next one, and sometimes the areas are actually a bit too large, forcing you to run from one side to the other for no reason, which feels like it takes forever, as you've killed everything and you're just wandering around. You will get other items from enemies like health potions, and these need to be used from the pause menu, so you can choose to use them on yourself or Robo Al. The graphics here are really good with a ton of detail, and the enemies are really cool designs, I'm assuming mostly from various parts of the show. It can be a little slow to get going, but the awesome graphics, great control and fun alchemy mechanics really made this one good fun for me to play. Definitely one for fans of the show, and I'd say even if you don't care about it like me, you'll probably enjoy it as well. Freaky Flyers is a crazy cartoon racing action game where you take control of a pilot from a pretty large selection of wacky racers, and then you take to the skies, winning races and completing a load of other objectives along the way. This is a really unique take on the fly racing genre. Each character has their own story, but does play through the same levels, or races, or tracks, whatever you want to call them. Being a cartoony game, most of the stories don't make sense, and most of the women have massive racks, so it's my kind of game. When you've chosen your racer, you're put into one of about 10 or so levels, which give you a few things to do. Firstly, there's the race aspect. Here, you just want to win the race. Sometimes you only have to come in the top few races, whereas other times you must be first and nothing else. The racing is good fun. The levels are large, quite open affairs, and all the characters control well enough, and they're quite different. But they do still have a route to follow on the tracks, and the game does a good job of having landmarks and waypoints that you don't tend to veer off course too often. Being a wacky racer, you get various weapons. All characters have a machine gun with unlimited ammo, which you can use against other racers or various parts of the course. But you also find power-ups that give you mines, rockets, homing missiles, boosts, and the usual lot. But what's also pretty unique here is that each race has a number of optional missions in it, kind of like the Tony Hawk games. These can be things like collecting a certain number of items, shooting targets, killing a certain number of opponents, or more track specific things like destroying a certain building or even finding hidden items and delivering them to other places or characters on the track. Sometimes you must complete these objectives to beat the stage, other times they are just optional, but will actually give you added bonuses, like if you complete one, you get an extra item slot letting you carry more weapons or boosts. These are a really nice touch, and it adds a fair bit more challenge to the game. It really helps keep things fresh, and the fact that most of these are optional is great. You are always told though if a level does have certain conditions to meet if you want to beat it. Not all the levels are races at all though. Some are dedicated dogfight levels where you have to take out other opponents, and sometimes there's even random people and monsters. There's even a tower defense style level. It's really great and you never really know what's going to come up next. As you've probably guessed, the game has a decent sense of humour and it's nothing taken seriously. The characters are all crazy caricatures and they have their own personalities as well as stats. And actually the graphics here are really good and I love how it all plays, and it runs incredibly smoothly. But yeah, it's just a really fun game. It looks great, plays very well, and does a great job of standing out from the crowd. Another cool arcade-style racer, but it's not quite as wacky, is Flatout. It's an arcade-style racer that doesn't waste any time, letting you get straight into the racing action by choosing from a handful of cars that each cost a few quid. You choose the one you want to buy, and then you choose from a pretty decent selection of races and events. These races take place on tracks in forests, sandy deserts, construction sites, proper race courses, and more. There's a good enough variety. Depending on where you finish in the race, you'll earn money, which you'll need to use to upgrade your car and buy new, better ones. What I like is that you don't have to come first to win money, but of course if you do, you'll get more cash. Even if you come last, you get a couple of quid thrown at you. Races have 8 or so other drivers in them, including you, and they are quite ruthless. Here you are encouraged to drive dangerously though, and cause as much damage to the other drivers as possible. You get money bonuses for smashing them up, as well as for damaging scenery, so don't go easy on them. They certainly won't go easy on you. I really like the variety in the tracks here, and you really have to take into account where you're racing. The upgrades to your car aren't just cosmetic, and you want the best tyres, suspension and engine for the track you're on. Using slick tyres on muddy or sandy tracks is a bad idea, and the handling will really be affected by it, making you slide all over the place. Of course, you'll need to win enough races to afford the tyres in the first place though. Even though you do get money, even if you don't win races, to open up new events you will actually need to place in the top 3. And as you'd expect, the races get harder and crazier with more and more things to crash into. And actually crashing here is just as fun to do as it is annoying. It's annoying because it means you're going to lose a few positions and have to play catch up, but it's a lot of fun because when you have a good crash, you see your character go flying through the windshield and scraping their face along the floor. It's pretty funny. And in fact, this is actually an actual game mechanic. As well as races, you've got Destruction Derby events where you've got to smash the other cars and be the last one standing. I'm actually really crap at these and don't know how you're meant to ram into the other cars without fucking yourself up, so I tend to ignore these modes. But there's also other bonus modes like the long jump and high jump. These are actually really fun events, and the aim here is to build up as much speed as you can and then eject your driver out of the car to see how far or how high you can make them fly. It works similarly to old track and field games where you press and hold a button, and depending on when you release it, it changes their trajectory. This mode would be loads of fun with a group of people all competing for the best distance. And it's these touches that make the game fun to play. It really doesn't take itself seriously. The actual driving is great, the cars handle well, and you're given plenty of customization options to tweak. But these are all easy to understand, and it does a good job of making it accessible to idiots like me who couldn't care less about tuning up cars. It actually makes it fun to do. It looks great with some excellent car models and some great demolition physics, and it all runs really fast, and I didn't experience any slowdown, which is always nice. And it's a friendly interface, and the ability to get stuck into the action really make this one that I had a lot of fun with. Furfighters is another game that was recommended by friend of the channel, Trevor Dowell, and it's really fun. A third-person, unique shooter where you get to take control of a bunch of ragtag animals who are a rebellion against a group of evil bears that are basically mobsters. You got loads of characters to play as here. There's a dog, cat, kangaroo, penguin, dragon, and small rodent thing that I can't remember what it is. Each one of the characters plays quite similarly, but they do each have their own unique ability of their own that you'll need to use throughout the levels. For example, the dog can dig tunnels in certain places, the cat can climb certain surfaces, the penguin can swim, the kangaroo can jump really high, and so on. You'll need to switch between the different animals throughout the levels in order to reach new areas and complete your objectives. You start in a hub world, which is also a training area, and I do recommend spending some time here to get used to how it all works. Once you've done that, you can access one of the levels, and you'll need to complete them in order if you want to get the items you need to open the next one. Each of the levels are massive, and they'll need quite a lot of exploration. You've got a few objectives in the levels, but for the most part they are just sort of sub-tasks to open up other areas of the level that let you complete your main objectives, which is basically to rescue all of the baby animals that have been kidnapped by evil bears. And the evil bears are all over the levels as well, and being gangsters, they've got a range of weapons like pistols, shotguns and machine guns. Thankfully, all of your characters are also pretty handy with these same weapons, and you'll always have a number of guns at your disposal. So there'll be loads of surprisingly big fun gunfights here between loads of cute animals. It's pretty cool, and I actually really like how it all plays. Now, another thing that Trev recommended, don't mind if I call you Trev, do you? Is that I should change the controls, and damn, he was right. The default controls kinda suck, and unfortunately the game doesn't let you customize the controls properly, but it does offer a lot of different options. And while the one I settled on wasn't perfect, it was perfectly manageable, being a twin-stick affair, and being the pro gamer that I am, it didn't take long for me to adjust, and I was soon killing bears like an alcoholic Russian. Something I kept thinking while I was playing is that the game really reminded me of some of the later sections of the Conker's Bad Fur Day game for the N64. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have the sex, swearing or violence that one does, but it really does seem to be inspired by it. There's no blood or anything here, which I actually think would have been a cool addition, but not having it doesn't take away from the gameplay, which is still very good. As mentioned, you'll be exploring the massive levels looking to rescue the babies, kill bears and find items and switches to let you progress. Once that's done, it's back to the hub world and on to the next stage. There is a really good mixture of combat, platforming and Mario style level exploration, and to find everything you'll need, you have to use the character bubbles that you'll find in the levels. These are the only way that you can switch to a different character. You can't just change whenever you want, even though most of the time I really did want to. Also, when you find a baby, you can only actually rescue the ones with the same species as your character that you're playing as. This can be tedious at times, as you'll have to do some backtracking quite often to change characters, and then try to remember where the hell that baby was. And I have a shite memory, so this was a problem for me. But the game looks fantastic with an awesome cel-shaded style, and I love me some cel shading. It really helps games stand out, and I don't think there's really any bad looking cel shading games out there. And yeah, I really would recommend this one. It looks really good, plays okay if you can get used to the controls or find a scheme that suits you, and it's one of those games that I really think could do well with a half decent remake, or maybe even a gritty reboot. That would be fun. And finally for today, here is Furry Tales. Yeah, I know. Furry Tales is an interesting action strategy game that's sort of a mix between Command & Conquer, Pikmin and Conker's Bad Fur Day. I don't think I've been mentioning Conker's Bad Fur Day twice in the same video. The story goes that the evil wolves are being evil, so you, a furry sheepdog character thing, have to amass an army of sheep to take them down. The gameplay here is kind of unique and genuinely quite interesting. You control a commander character, starting with a sexy dog woman, but more become available as the story progresses. Your commanders run around the level using the analog stick, and you can collect any items and also attack with them. As you play, you also find buildings. These work similarly to other strategy games. So you get buildings that generate resources, some that train troops, some that create vehicles, and that sort of thing. Also, your commanders have different buffs. For example, the dog lady automatically heals any units under her command. The big buff dog dude gives them all increased attack power. This is a nice touch, and it means you do have to choose who is best to go with which situation. In this game, you never actually build buildings, they're always just on the levels already. You usually start with one or two, but any more that you find are either abandoned or sometimes occupied by the enemy. If the building's abandoned, you'll see a number above it. That's how many of your troops you need to put in it to take it over. Once you've taken it over, you can use it to create whatever is in it, as long as you have a building that generates money, that is. If it's an enemy that holds the building, you'll need to attack it. This doesn't destroy the building, it just gets rid of anyone inside. Then, if you've got enough units, you can take it over and use it for yourself. You can then use the triangle button to switch between your buildings to train units, upgrade your units, or do whatever function the building does. Once you've trained units, you can then use your selected commander to call them to you, no matter where you are on the map, which is really handy. These units then follow you at all times unless you tell them otherwise. If you see an enemy or something you want to interact with, you just point the right analog stick towards whatever it is, and they'll know what to do. So if it's an enemy, they'll attack, if there's a building, they'll take it over, and so on. It's easy to get used to, and really kind of like Pikmin. You do get a good selection of units here. There's a machine gun sheep that are your standard infantry, rocket sheep that are powerful but slow to move, there's mortar sheep that are great against buildings but not so good against other land units, and so on. New ones are introduced throughout the game, which is cool. You also get objectives, which aren't always just a case of killing everything else, which is nice, but most levels they are. It's not an easy game though, and it doesn't take long for the enemies to attack your bases, and you'll need to leave troops around the map strategically, and you'll want to defend just as much as you attack here. The graphics are fine, but nothing too impressive. It's all smooth though, and I never had any slowdown even with dozens of units on screen at once. I really didn't know what to expect with this game. I literally got it for its name and silly box art, but it did actually surprise me, and I would recommend it to strategy fans. It's a budget game, so don't go expecting the world, but for what it is, I had a fair bit of furry fun. So there you go, 10 hidden gems for the PlayStation 2, starting with the letter F. What are some other ones we could have included? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. And don't forget, if you want your voice featured in a future video, just get in touch and we'll sort it out. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.